Introducing myself here, my name is Scott. This video is going to be commentary on the cancellation of UFC 151 / prediction video for UFC 152. If you haven't heard by now, you've been living under a rock. UFC 151 was cancelled due to late injury by Dan Henderson. Hendo have a partial tear in his MCL. Dana White probably called every contracted fighter in the UFC. No one came forward except for arch-villain Chael Sonnen. Sonnen and Dana White agreed to set the fight. Dana White brought it before Jon Jones, and yet Jon Jones declined to take the fight. Dana White goes apeshit, have a media campaign trashing his fighter Jon Jones, and Jon Jones has become public enemy number one. The Karate Kid was next in line, so Dana White tells Machida, "You're fighting Jones at UFC 152. Machida says, "You're nuts. I'm not going to risk probably my last chance, Dana, at the title, with only 30 days to train to fight probably the greatest UFC fighter of all times, Jon Jones." So Dana White dug up Vitor Belfort, dusted him off, and now he will be challenging Jon Jones for the light heavyweight title. I thought Belfort was only fought at 185. Anyway, the ill-fated UFC 151 is going to become MMA folklore. The card that never happened is going to become legend, like the lost city of Atlantis or something. Anytime anyone wants to piss Dana White off, they're going to say 151. Stupid teenagers going to be yelling 151 at Dana White in the parking lot as he pulled off in his car. Dana White hates the numeric combination of 151. As we speak right now, Dana White's removing 151 from his world right now. If his address have 151 in, he's going to move. If his cell phone number is 151, he's going to throw it out the window. If his home phone number have 151 in it, he's going to change it. The numerical combination of 151 would not exist in Dana White's world anymore. Now, as for Greg Jackson probably had Jones' best interest in mind. Jon Jones made a bad decision, in my opinion, but it was his decision to make. Greg Jackson only advised against taking the fight. He didn't tell Jones not to take the fight. Jones only asked for Jackson's opinion, and Jackson gave it to him. I think it was the wrong decision, but I can't understand where they are coming from. I can understand where they're coming from. Jon Jones should have just taken the fight. I mean, that's what fighters do. You put on your hard hat and you go to work. I mean, I'm not mad at the kid, but it was a bad decision, but it was his decision to make. Chael Sonnen had been sitting on a couch watching television while Jon Jones has been training. Sonnen wouldn't have been ready in 3 days. I'm sorry. Dan Henderson is more of a threat than Sonnen at this point. At least Henderson has a big punch in his arsenal. Sonnen couldn't bust a grape with a hammer. The guy just doesn't hit hard. Plus, he wouldn't have been in good enough condition to even wrestle with Jon Jones on the ground. So, for fighters, and as for the fighters that's bitching and whining and about not having money to support themselves or their families, I'm sorry, but that's their failure. That's not Jon Jones' fault. I mean, Jon Jones isn't obligated to take care of anyone's family, and he's not a charity. He's not the welfare. I mean, those fighters that's having financial problems, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's their failure to provide for their families. Not Jones. It's not Jones' problem. You think those fighters give a shit if Jon Jones' family ate another meal? Hell no, they don't care. So why should Jones care about them? I mean, I noticed these fighters aren't barking at Dana White, and you know what? All this responsibility really should fall on the shoulders of Dana White. You know, whether fans But as fans, it's okay for us to be angry. I understand that, to be mad at Jones, but we don't know the intricate detailed dealings of promoters and fighters. I mean, John Jones spoiled the party. Okay, the fans, we are like kids. It's alright for us to be pissed, but Dana White is like the boss. He's the adult of the situation. He's not supposed to join in with the kids and start bashing John Jones. Any failure of the UFC falls on Dana White's shoulders, not the shoulders of a 25-year-old kid. I'm old school. I'm sorry. If your company fails, it's the boss' fault. He should take the hit, not the employees. Say, for example, a few years back, I think it was when General Motors was struggling. Basically Obama had to bail General Motors out. General Motors had a number of failures. The CEO of General Motors, Rick Wagner, was held accountable for the failures. Not the guy, not the employees, not the workers, not Bob on the assembly line. And by the way, Rick Wagner was fired. So the CEO was accountable. Any problems Dana White had, or any problems the Fertitta brothers had with John Jones, I'm not sure if I'm saying they're right. I mean their names right. The Fertitta brothers, whatever. If any problem they had with Jones, it should have been handled internally. The fans should have never known about Dana White being angry with the Jones. The reason Dana White threw Jones under the bus, ran him over, and backed it up, and ran him over again, the reason he did that was to protect his own ass. There's a theme developing, I noticed this theme developing with Dana White, and that's called scapegoating everyone for your failures of the UFC. The first few Fox cars were absolutely terrible. I'm sorry, but they were. That's a failure of the UFC. Remember Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2? Remember, originally it was supposed to take place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It would have been the biggest fight in UFC history. It would have dwarfed UFC 129. It would have destroyed GSP and Jake Shields' record held in Canada. And yet, what happened? Dana White screwed up the scheduling. The UN has some kind of conference in Brazil, and Dana White blamed the UN for the scheduling screw up. So guess what? That was another UFC failure. When UFC 149 came around, everyone knew that UFC 149 was going to stink. Okay, there was no big names on the card besides Faber. For the first time, the UFC media actually had some balls and spoke up and said that UFC 149 was going to suck big time, and it did. And once UFC 149 failed to deliver, what Dana White do? Yep, he did it once again. He scapegoated his fighters. He started pointing fingers. He said it was the fighters' fault. He pointed fingers at everyone but himself. No shit, Brainiac. If you fill your card with a bunch of average fighters and spread your fighters thin as much as you have, of course the card is going to suck. So UFC 149 was another failure by the UFC. Of course, UFC 151 which was another failure by the UFC and Dana White. If Dana White really cared about the fighters, like he pretends he do, he wouldn't have canceled UFC 151. He could have had UFC 151 anyway. It's just he wouldn't have had a main event, maybe a main fight or whatever. I'm sure he could have gotten some fighters or some big names or something. I don't know. The UFC 151 was another Dana White failure, except this time he hurt one of the best fighters' careers with this angry ranting he has been doing in the media. If John Jones sued Dana White for defamation of character, it wouldn't be one court in the United States that wouldn't rule in the favor of John Jones. So setting up the most epic fight in UFC history that was supposed to happen between Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen in UFC 147 in Brazil didn't happen. A failure. UFC 149, another failure. Card lackluster, boring fights, terrible card. Everyone said it was going to be, and it was a failure. UFC 149, a failure. UFC 151, a colossal failure of all time. Okay? So that's within a few months, you had UFC 147 that was supposed to take place with Anderson Silva, Chael Sonnen, a failure. UFC 149, a failure. UFC 151, a failure. Okay? I don't know. Maybe the Fertitta brothers should consider hiring someone else to help Dana White, or maybe Dana White has taken the UFC as far as it can go. But maybe it's time for a new president. And of course, the MMA media is scared of Dana White. They don't want to happen to them what happened to Loretta Hunt. I mean, MMA media is terrible. I mean, they won't make any real criticism of Dana White. They won't call out Dana White scapegoating the fighters. And you know why? Because they all want access to Dana White. And at any time, he can close that down. At any time. The mainstream sports media isn't scared of Dana White, though. And rightfully so. They are calling this a Dana White failure. They're calling UFC 151 a Dana White failure. And thank goodness someone is. So please, people need to really reconsider where the blame should really go. On the back of some 25-year-old kid. I'm talking about Jon Jones. Isn't the reason why the UFC has come up short again. Pretty soon, slow and cowardly MMA media is going to catch up eventually. And every time, and they're going to figure out every time there's a failure by the UFC, Dana White began pointing fingers and everyone else is at fault. You know, because this is just ridiculous, you know. But anyway, okay, I'm done with this. I spent more time on that than I wanted to. UFC 151 is gone and good riddance. Now on to UFC 152. Vitor Belfort versus Jon Jones. Now Belfort hands are very fast. His hands are fast like a magician. But can Belfort make Jon Jones' title defense record disappear? I doubt it. Jon Jones is going to win this fight, even though I feel that Belfort is a bigger threat to Jones than Dan Henderson was. What Vitor have to do is not stand in front of Jones like he did with Silva. He has to get inside. I know that's easier said than done because of Jones' massive reach, and yet Vitor has to find a way inside. Jon Jones shouldn't take any chances. If I was Jones, I wouldn't take any chances with Belfort. Take him down, ground and pound the hell out of him. I mean, I do think Jones can pull. I don't think Jones can pull off some amazing Anderson Silva type shit, highlight reel shit. But I mean, it's possible. But Jones should just go for the Randy Couture and Dan Henderson. I mean, Randy Couture and Hendo show the blueprint on how to beat Vitor Belfort. I say Jon Jones will have this fight about third round submission win. Jon Jones for the win. I just think, even though I think that Belfort won't mentally break or whatever, I think he showed that he is a lot stronger, especially when he was when he fought Rumble Johnson. He was in trouble in that fight, and yet he pulled through. I still think that Jon Jones is just a totally different story for him. But if Belfort can get in the inside of Jon Jones is going to be in trouble. But I just don't see that happening. So I'm gonna go with Jon Jones for the win. Submission third round. If you like this video, I will be making more. If you enjoyed it, thank you for listening, and peace.